In the meantime, in recent years, the reach of authoritarian regimes has stretched far beyond their borders. Russia's government, like several others around the world, has pursued critics and political opponents abroad under the banner of national security. From the poisoning of former Russian spy Sergei Skripal in the UK to the killings of exiled journalists and dissidents in Europe, these actions expose a troubling global trend of cross-border repression. And so at this time, we unpack how governments are weaponizing security narratives to justify extraterritorial attacks on dissenters and what this means for global democracy, human rights, and international law. And joining me for this part of the discussion is Bolu Michael-Biyi, a foreign policy analyst, and he joins me from Lobamba in Eswatini. Thank you so much, Bolu, for coming around.
Thanks for having me.
So, yes, let's look at this. How has Russia's pursuit of dissenters abroad emboldened, or should we say, legitimized similar tactics by other authoritarian regimes?
All right, thank you very much for having me. And I believe strongly that Russia was the one that wrote the playbook, and they simply left it on the table for every other country to copy, because we've seen this same tactic being repeated by Russia and other countries. Because after the case of Skripal, we've seen the case of Litvinenko and others. And what was the global response, the response of the international community? They simply, some will dish out sanctions, others will make a lot of statements, and then within months, world leaders are back to doing business as usual. This reminds me of the case of of Jamal Khashoggi in 2018, where this was a prominent Saudi critic. He went into his country's consulate in Turkey, and he was unalived and dismembered. And what was the international response? The same sanctions, the same statements out there. World leaders within months were back to doing business with Saudi Arabia. So Russia is not just doing these things out of isolation. They've been able to see, they've seen that, they could commit this act and they could survive with the consequences. They knew that, okay, the world international community will only make noise for a while and they will keep quiet. So that's why, because there are no consequences for their actions, no real consequences, and that's why they keep repeating this playbook over and over.
So then what does this trend reveal about growing impunity of powerful states within the international system?
Well, it's a really uncomfortable trend, and it only states how the international system actually works, or should I say how they pretend to work. If we look at the things that have been happening, even before now, let's look at the pattern. For example, in 2006, the poisoning of Litvinenko in London with radioactive material. In 2018, it was Skripal who was poisoned with a nerve agent. And 2020, we had the case of Navalny, who was poisoned as well. So each time Russia has tested its boundaries, and they found that, it's actually softer than expected in terms of their landing. They always have this soft landing in the end. So this trend kind of reveals the impunity that these autocrats work with, and it's growing, it's becoming institutionalized because, there are no consequences. And other countries, they look at, Russia was able to get away with it. Saudi Arabia was able to get away with it. Well, I can, every country is equal in the book, so I can as well just do it and get away with it, especially if I'm a country that is paying allegiance to a country like Russia. So it's a growing trend. It's becoming an institution, and it's very bad for the world, really.
And we also see, some governments that often invoke national security under the guise of national security to justify targeting critics or dissidents overseas or wherever they may be. Now, just like you said, is a worrying trend, but then we don't see some sort of consequences being meted out or some way of curbing these kind of dubious guises.
You see, the reason why they use national security is because it's a very broad term, and when it's something that gets another country scared. It's becoming the joker. Basically, it's a vague, elastic term. It could literally mean anything. It could be, it could mean anything from terrorism down to just embarrassing the government. So it kind of triggers this automatic difference. When you mention security, it makes the other country kind of take a step back, because if you now challenge them on that thing, it will become a face-to-face confrontation. So countries like to evoke this particular word, which is really funny, let's think about the case of Rwanda when they were trying to justify pursuing Paul Rusesabagina, the Hotel Rwanda hero. It's the same national security that they provoked, and other countries continue to do this because of how broad that term is and how scary, how it kind of pushes other country away or make them to have that rethink, because the moment national security is mentioned, it becomes an issue of territorial integrity. It becomes an issue of the safety of the people, and because citizens of a country, they take their safety seriously, they are emotionally attached to that word as well. So it's very easy for the people in the country to be triggered, into an uprising to defend their nation when that word national security is triggered. And it's quite unfortunate that countries are using this as a joker to get away with a lot of human rights violations.
So does it mean that, the boundary between defending national interests and violating another country's sovereignty is gradually becoming blurred?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not an accidental thing. I think it's a deliberate strategy that autocrats use to operate in that gray zone. They try to exploit and take advantage of that gray zone. National interest is the phrase, or national security as well, is a phrase that keeps expanding. It could go from territorial defense, could also mean economic dominance, it could mean ideological influence, it could mean silencing criticism abroad, it could mean so many things. Also, countries, they begin to trigger, they invoke the word sovereignty in a selective manner, so that they kind of get the respect that they feel they should have, while they are violating the rights of other people, which is not good. And it's gradually being normalized, because each small violation makes the next one to look shocking. Look at how Turkey operates in northern Syria, for example, and also in Iraq. They pursue Kurdish groups here and there, and then they call them terrorists. And what do they say they are doing? They say they are defending their borders from security threats. Doesn't make sense in my opinion. But I mean, it is what it is. That's how it just reveals how how hypocritical the international system could be, unfortunately.
Okay, so now that we are at this hypocritical role, just as you put it, now, are there mechanisms that states can, employ in order to prevent issues around cross-border assassinations, abductions, cyber harassments, even exiled activists, most especially as it involves exiled activists, without having to strain diplomatic ties?
Well, there are international structures in place. I'm a lawyer, so of course the International Criminal Court is there. They are there to prosecute individuals for crimes against humanity, but they are also controlled by major powers that actually violate these things, which is quite unfortunate. Some major powers are not there, like the US, Russia, and China. They are not part of this because sometimes they want to just want to get away from being accountable for some of their actions. The UN Security Council is also there. They can impose sanctions. They have the veto power, but then, to me, in my opinion, some of these big organizations or bodies are just toothless bulldogs, There's also the Interpol Red Notice, which is basically to facilitate the arrest. We all know Interpol, and some of these things are in place, but then when countries are pulling out from these institutions in order not to be held accountable, it raises questions about the record, the human rights record of these countries. We never get them to book. But if one African country somewhere does something, the next minute they are in the ICC. So I believe that largely, when we look at the trend, the ICC and these other bodies have been quite hypocritical. But are there structures in place to check and balance these things? Yes, they are there. But how effective are they? We cannot say.
Well, that's the million-dollar question, I must say, most especially when it comes to implementing the rules guarding against these so-called diplomatic infiltrations on other sovereign soils. Bolu Michael-Biyi, foreign policy analyst, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.